Greetings, one and all. It is me, G minus Mark. I am in my barn. This is How Country Is This? And that is the horses feeding in the background. They're moving around. Look, I am up in my barn and it takes 30 minutes sometimes for the horses to finish feeding. And I thought, why not do one of these? Let's get rid of that light. Because that's going to bother things. Oh, we're going to have a special guest as well. If anybody doesn't like cats. Alright, Ginger, you going to come and tell this story? Come on, Mr. Red Sobine. So, this is already going awry. This story isn't about somebody I met, but somebody I feel whose oh, my head will block out that light. Somebody I feel whose ghost has followed me around for nearly 40 years, just in cool little stories. And as I was thinking about it, I've got enough cool stories to make a little episode. We're talking about Luke McDaniel, also known as Jeff Daniels. He was primarily a country singer. He's made his first recordings for trumpet label in Mississippi, which was Wall Boy, and he also did a song called No More, which same song Jimmy Haggart did on Sun. And he did another one on trumpet, tribute to Hank Williams, my buddy, because he was you showboat, because he was friends with Hank Williams. And after that, he cut a bunch of sides, at least 10, gotta be 8 or 10. I've got nearly all of them, I'm missing one. But he must have cut 8 to 10 sides for King Records, which were all kind of Hank Williams style, hillbilly, similar to artists like Charlie Gore and Hard Rock Gunter, a lot of the King artists at the time. And they're all excellent. The only one I'm missing is one called Drive On. And after that, he kind of got into the rock and roll thing, cut a record, a Stardate Custom on the Venus label called Homeward Mule, Homeward Cat, and sorry about the distraction. Go, I'll feed you something in a minute. Now the haystack's full. I'm sitting on a haystack. We were talking about Luke McDaniels. Then he got into the rock and roll thing, and he cut another Stardate Custom called Switchblade Sam under the name of Jeff Daniels, which was a dynamite rock and roll record. And another record, which is kind of be the start of our story, for the Melody label, which was usually an R&B label, and that was called Daddy-O Rock. The flip side was called Hey Woman. And that kind of leads me to my story. So back in, I think it was 84, 85, could have been earlier, maybe, actually it's probably earlier than that. There was a story in a British fanzine, or kind of a rockabilly fanzine, called New Commotion on Luke McDaniel. Oh, I should mention he cut a bunch of things at Sun that were all unissued until the 70s, and then a decade later they bought out a whole bunch of fantastic rockabilly records. You should look them up under Luke McDaniel or Jeff Daniels. I digress. But anyway, the story kind of begins for me because the first thing that happened was I saw an article on him, and at the end it said Luke would like to hear from any of his fans. And I was like, a teenager, and I like, great, I'm going to write to him. And I wrote him a fan letter. I have no idea what I would have said in it. But he wrote me a really nice letter back, which I still have, and if I was inside I might have got it as a prop instead of Red Sovine. But he sent a photograph with it. But the thing that really, really caught my imagination was, obviously my name is Mark Lee Allen, and he wrote, P.S. I see your name is Mark Lee Allen. The fella who played saxophone on Daddy-O Rock was a tall black fella called Lee Allen. And I never knew that, because he was the guy who did Walking with Mr. Lee, fantastic sax player. And that was an interesting bit of trivia. So I kind of had Luke in mind, and Luke passed away some years after that. And I was bidding on the Stardate Custom Homeward Mule on eBay, and this has got to be over 20 years ago. And it could have been actually less than that. It could have been when I was over here, actually. No, I was over here, so I want to say it was probably about 18 years ago. Big deal. But anyway, it was in the days that it used to be on eBay, everything wasn't so private. So if somebody bid against you or people were bidding, it would have their ID. So if it was someone you knew, you could click on it and send them a message. Like, not like now where it's like Fort Knox. So I won that record, and the guy who I outbid sent me a message, and we got talking, and I wound up speaking to him, and he told me this story, and it was one I've never forgotten because it was so cool. And he told me why he was bidding on the record, and I think in the end I wound up making a tape of everything I had by Luke. But the story he told me was that when he'd been a small kid, like kind of 7 or 8, he'd had a really, really terrible life. This is the guy who I'd been bidding against. He said his father beat him, he was alcoholic, and the father beat the mother, and home was misery. And he took solace in walking to the end of, their property and sitting on a fence, singing guitar, playing Hank Williams songs. And this is about like an 8-year-old kid. He said, and he'd do this every day just to get away from the house. He said, and one day, Luke comes walking down down the road, whatever, and he hears this kid, and he walks over and he says, hey, he says, you're a pretty good singer. And the kid says, yeah, I like to sing Hank Williams. And he said Luke wound up kind of looking out for him, realizing the kid was, obviously in a really broken home, and Luke would feed him and all this kind of stuff, he said, and took really good care of him and gave him money and kind of really looked after him. And he said he looked upon Luke as a father figure. He said, but then he became a teenager, moved away, went to college, and lost track of Luke and never ever saw him again. And I thought that was a pretty cool story. It kind of stuck with me. And not long after that, I can't remember if it was through buying a record. Red. Let me adjust my cat. But sometime after that, I wound up in contact with Jack Cardwell's son, who was another artist on King. And he, again, we got talking about something, and he told me a bunch of stories about his father. One of which was he had a nudie suit that had a Jack playing card and a wishing well. Jack Cardwell. But apparently, we're talking sometime, and he said, my dad knew this guy and that guy. And he says, when I was a teenager and I was younger, we lived in I think it could have been a trailer park, or it may have been a house, with Luke McDaniel. And he had similar stories to tell about Luke, about how wonderful he was and all that kind of stuff. And like I say, I never got to meet Luke, but I did get to have a letter from him, which I still have, and I'll probably post a picture of it somewhere. And I feel there'll be more Luke McDaniel stories / Jeff Daniels coming my way. Yeah, this has been a bit, I've had a cat crawling all over me, and it's kind of, it is what it is. But it's pretty atmospheric. It makes a change from just looking at my room. I got a horse, a donkey, and somewhere there's another horse back there. But that's another story. Okay, well, this has been G-Mark from the barn with my Luke McDaniel story. Au revoir.